Order, folks, get to your seats, please. Microphone, please. Thank you, sir. While we're going to our seats, I'll just quickly read our Walpole Media TV announcement. It is pleased to be providing live coverage of tonight's town meeting on Comcast Channel 22 and Verizon Channel 30. Live streaming of this meeting is also available on YouTube by going to the Walpole Media channel, and you can watch the replay of this meeting anytime by going to the website walpolemedia.tv and clicking the On-Demand button. The Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Tellers. Piece of paper. Thank you. On the left, Mr. Leith and Mr. Hagler. Thank you, Mr. Hagler and Mr. Leith. In the center, Nancy Dayan and Carrie Denizio. Thank you. Sorry, folks, I'm having some trouble with the lights here tonight. Can we dim that down just a tiny bit for me? Can't even see hands. On the right, tellers, please, Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Buckley. Thank you, Mr. Buckley and Mr. Sullivan. Okay. So just a quick reminder, folks, on the speakers. Come down front, sit on this side, left to right, over here, right to left. If you know you've spoken and you're in there and people come behind you, just make sure you know I'm going to bypass you. I do take notes and know who's been down and who's spoken before, so just remember that. Do not give up any of your time, because if you speak for a minute and you relinquish the mic and you come back, doesn't mean you get 2 minutes and you can jump in wherever you want. You have to go to the end of the line, and I will let all other members that have not spoken speak before you. So keep that in mind. I do not want to see that happen to anyone. We do have one thing we need to do, and I'm going to try to find a little spot in here, maybe take a really short break at a certain point in time. We do have to caucus for precincts 7 and 8 for the Rules Committee, because 2 members were not returned to their seats, and I appointed members, so those do have to go to caucus for those committees. Those precincts, okay? So I will let you know, and you can huddle up in a certain area when we take a little break. All right. So we are on to Article 15. Article 15 is the transfer of oversight of the Animal Control Officer. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the Walpole General Bylaws, Chapter 5, Animal Control Officer, Article 1, Powers and Duties, by inserting the bold, underlined, italic text and deleting the strike-through text in Section 1 of the bylaws as set forth below and as otherwise set forth in the warrant under Article 15. The Board of Selectmen shall appoint an animal control officer to perform such duties as directed by the Chief of Police, to enforce the rules and bylaws concerning dogs and warm-blooded animals in the town of Walpole, and perform such other duties as directed by the Chief of Police. In the absence of the Animal Control Officer, the Police Department will act as the Animal Control Officer, coordinating with the full-time Animal Control Officer or such other Animal Control Officers as the town may from time to time employ, including Animal Control Officers from neighboring towns. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote?
Finance Committee voted favorable action 12-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Gallivan, Board of Selectmen?
The Selectmen voted favorable action 3-2. And I did just have a couple of comments. The goal of the article is to put the Animal Control Officer under the day-to-day control of the police chief, rather than to have it continue to report to a part-time board, which the Board of Selectmen is. I believe that we do want to give the chief of police the ability to fully utilize the ACO position and skills and allow the chief to assign all duties as directed by the chief with no limits. As I have said many times, we, the Board of Selectmen, appoint the police chief, not because we know how to run a police department day to day, but because we know he does know how to run the police department day to day. And he'll do what's in the best interest of the town for the safety and protection of the town. I'm not in a position, nor do I have the knowledge or experience to want to give the chief direction on a day-to-day basis. The ACO hiring would continue to be approved by the Board of Selectmen, just like we do with police officers. The Board of Selectmen appoint police officers. They're under the control of the police chief. When the ACO is not on duty, the police already act as ACO during the hours the ACO is not available. I think it's also important to note that many of the calls that come in for the ACO go through the switchboard, and so the police are already alerted, and in many cases they respond to those calls as well. Thank you.
Ms. Regusta.
Ann Regusta, Precinct 3. Mr. Moderator, I have a substitute motion.
Okay. We have a motion, substitute motion from Ann Regusta, seconded by Robert Damisch. So the substitute motion is, what I'm going to do is the beginning remains the same. I'll just read this part down here so you can note the differences. So the Board of Selectmen shall appoint an animal control officer to perform such duties as directed by the Chief of Police, so that's the same. To enforce the rules and bylaws, that's the same. Here's where there's a bit of change. Of this chapter, and in compliance with Section 304 of the Board of Selectmen Policies and Procedures, now it continues on the same, concerning dogs and warm-blooded animals in the town of Walpole. And then we strike the sentence, and perform such other duties as directed by the Chief of Police. And then the balance of the article is the same. So we're just inserting the chapter in compliance with Section 304 of the Board of Selectmen Policies and Procedures, and we're striking and perform such other duties as directed by the Chief of Police. Ms. Regusta, did I get that correctly, your estimation? Oh,
Yeah.
It's up there.
It's up there.
Thank you. Further questions? You're going to speak now, Ann?
I'd just like to say a few things. As Chairman Gallivan has said, the Board of Selectmen does appoint the animal control officer for Walpole. That's under Mass General Law. And currently, the animal control officer reports to the Board of Selectmen through the town administrator. The purpose, or my understanding of the purpose of this change, was to, as Chairman Gallivan said, to delegate the day-to-day operations of the animal control officer to the Chief of Police, because they're full-time. They can respond to the demands of the animal control officer. I added the Section 304 of the Board of Selectmen Policies and Procedures, because that is a new policy and procedure that the Board of Selectmen implemented as far as animal care guidelines for animals that are seized by the town. And the animal control officer would have to follow those rules and policies. By adding the language of the words of this chapter and adding the language of Section 304, I think, I know, that the duties of the animal control officer are entirely encompassed within Chapter 5 and in Section 304. So the terminology "and perform such other duties as directed by the chief of police, I think is redundant. I don't think it's necessary because I don't think there are any other duties that would be assigned by the chief of police. And I do agree with Chairman Gallivan that we should not and do not micromanage the law enforcement activities of the Walpole PD, but the animal control officer is not a law enforcement position. It's the animal control position. And I don't think that, despite the reporting of the animal control officer to the chief for his day-to-day reporting activities, I don't think that we should blur the lines to have any other law enforcement duties assigned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ragusta. Ms. Lawson.
Lawson, Precinct 2. I'm opposed to the substitute motion. We had a lot of discussion on the warrant article as presented. We had the benefit of the chief there to answer questions. I think what we want to do is ensure flexibility. The fact that, of course, the duties have to be performed in accordance with the law, Section 304 of the Board of Selectmen Policies and Procedures. So I don't think that it's fatal not to have that specifically included. However, I am opposed to deleting perform such other duties as directed by the Chief of Police for the reason that I think it's up to the Chief of Police to manage this position if we vote to move it under the Police Department. And it's my understanding that the police are almost always involved when there are situations where there's an aggressive animal or biting or what have you, and so there's already an existing interplay. And I think this allows the Chief of Police to supervise appropriately in almost every position that I've ever run into, and I've written a lot of position descriptions in my career as a human resources person. That terminology, perform other such duties as required, as directed, is very standard language. So I'm opposed to deleting it, and I am strongly in favor of the body dealing with the warrant article as written. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson. Mr. Pila?
Richard Pila, Precinct 7. To you, Mr. Moderator, a couple of questions for the town administrator. Jim, what is the annual salary of this position, and what specifically are its responsibilities?
Excuse me, Mr. Pila and everyone else, please, I will direct the questions. I appreciate the direction yourself, but I will direct the questions. I just want to avoid the back and forth that we had some of the earlier evenings. This is a regular innocuous, but I'm just using this opportunity, okay?
That's fine.
So, Mr. Johnson.
The annual salary for the position is $52,250. And to be quite honest with you, I don't want to be pigeonholed as far as what's the job description. I can provide you with a copy of it. It's basically, I can give you the down and dirty. The person goes out, needs to be available 24/7. He responds to animals that are hit beside the side of the road, deer, turkeys, whatever. He's responsible for the kennel, responsible for the dogs that may get called as far as barking or leash law violations. If there's a hearing before the Board of Selectmen, he is responsible for presenting the information to the Board of Selectmen so they can hear for a dangerous dog, if that's an incident. But it's about 4 or 5 pages. I can provide you with a copy of it if you'd like.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Moderator, would this be considered a full-time position? And the reason why I ask that is I know in other communities on the eastern end of Norfolk County, there are a few communities that have been collaborating with this position, where there is a person that fulfills these responsibilities, but does so for multiple communities. Has the town considered this? That's the reason for asking
Mr.
this
Gallivan,
position.
since this is a Board of Selectmen, do you have comments, or Jim?
Just to, there has been no opportunity at this time to regionalize the Animal Control Office. A few years ago, I'd say maybe 7 or 8 years ago, there was an opportunity there. Another community went in another direction, but since with my tenure here, there hasn't been that direct opportunity where Foxborough or Medfield have come to us and said, we got an opening, let's work together. But if that's out there, definitely something I'd be willing to consider.
Do we have, through you, Mr. Moderator, is that position currently filled in
Mr.
the town of
Johnson?
in the town of Walpole?
Yes.
Has the, through you, Mr. Moderator, has the town of Walpole reached out to neighboring communities to see, to explore whether or not they have a vacancy that perhaps the animal control officer for Walpole could also be providing that service for neighboring communities, and then each participating community could pay a pro rata share of the $52,250, and I assume that that doesn't include benefits.
Mr. Johnson?
Just jotting down a few notes here. I know of no vacancies in Norfolk, Norwood, Medfield, Sharon, or Foxborough, and those are the kind of the surrounding towns. They all currently have their positions filled.
Is that something that, to you, Mr. Moderator, is that something that the Board of Selectmen would consider going forward?
Mr. Gallivan?
I think the answer is yes, we would consider it. We recently did that with a veterans officer, the veterans agent. We're sharing a veterans agent with Medfield. The opportunity arose, and we were able to work out an agreement, so I'd be open to that.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, then I would encourage the Board of Selectmen to perhaps discuss this among themselves and really look at the opportunity. Wherever we can regionalize and save the taxpayers money, then that's something that we should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pila. Ms. McCarthy?
Shannon McCarthy, Precinct 4. I just want to clarify, this appointed animal control officer, will this person be selected from amongst full-time police officers, or will it be a broader scope than that?
Mr. Gallivan?
Right now, we have somebody in the position, so it's not currently open. I think that if the position became open again in the future, that's when we would want to reach out and make sure, if we haven't already, talked to other neighboring towns and look at sharing and determine what we would need to make the ACO position work in Walpole and possibly somewhere else. One of the issues with the ACO that happens is when, you know, a dog or a deer or some kind of animal has been hit beside the road. A lot of it is about being able to respond quickly to the scene. And that's why if we were going to try to do something like that, we would want to do it with a nearby community where you could get, Medfield, certainly we could get there in time, but if we're trying to go from one end of Walpole to the other end of Foxborough, response time may not be adequate, and the police may already be there, so it's something we'd have to look at in the future.
Okay.
Mr. Ardeen, you had something to add?
Be a full-time police officer. The initial language that became before the Finance Committee somewhat left it open that it would be a police officer. The language that we have changed it to here, not in the substitute motion, but the substitute motion doesn't change it either, that it would not be a full-time police officer.
Thank you. And then such other duties as directed by the chief of police, would this still be within the scope strictly of animal control, or could those duties extend beyond that potentially?
Just for clarification, the substitute motion removes that, but I'll allow the question because I think it's pertinent. So, Mr. Johnson? Town Council?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, through you. To the extent that the position itself is answerable to the chief of police, there may be things that aren't anticipated now relating to that position, the animal control officer position. And if in fact it was a police officer who was serving as the animal control officer, then there would also be a need not to limit the authority of the police chief with respect to that person's activities. So the idea of having that language in there is to provide the flexibility needed for the chief to appropriately manage the individual. In addition, it would address any issues such as personnel rules and regulations that the chief believed were appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCarthy. Mr. Hamilton.
Hamilton, Precinct 5. I have no objection to the substitute motion, but I have a couple of questions. Today, my understanding is if the Walpole Animal Control Officer is not available, we have a deal with, I know Norwood, and their animal control officer responds to Walpole. Will that still be in effect?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes, it would be.
So there'd be no change to that. Now, if we couldn't get an animal control officer from another town, could a police officer be in that position without the wording in the substitute motion?
Mr. Johnson.
So that's some of my concern. With this language here, that kind of eliminates that flexibility. I'll give you an example. So let's say Mr. Spillane, who's our current ACO, is out sick for an extended amount of time, or maybe he retires or leaves. The challenge may be, let's say there's someone he can move in there, Officer Smith. If Officer Smith is able to do the job, you know, and balance his police duties, that could, this bylaw, the way it's worded, could create a problem. That's why, by eliminating that, it causes a bit of concern there.
Well, what's happening, I believe today, is that if there's no animal control officer available and no one from the state's available, that a police officer responds to it if it's a problem with an animal, and the chief has control over that officer. So I don't see the need for that wording, and I don't think it would change anything. Today, a police officer can fill in when there's no animal control officer, and he still is reporting to the chief.
Mr. Hamilton, I didn't hear a question. I heard a comment.
Well,
You look
yes.
like you're looking for an answer.
So we could take that, perform such other duties as directed by the chief of police out, and it wouldn't change the way things are happening today.
I think town council responded to that question already with respect to personnel matters.
So if a police officer responded to an animal problem, it would be a problem because the chief of police wouldn't be in control of them?
Mr. Johnson.
I think it might be a good idea to defer to the chief on this. Do you mind?
Sure.
Hello? So Mass General Law does allow, well, the town has to have an animal control officer. You shall appoint an animal control officer. It can either be, as Walpole does it right now, where we have a dedicated ACO, or it can be a police officer. Our bylaws, you know, there's a lot of things in our bylaws where an animal control officer can enforce, such as the leash law. In the absence of the animal control officer, a police officer can step in the animal control officer's place, and we can enforce those laws. For example, if somebody was bitten, or if it was a leash law violation, you know, barking dogs, that kind of thing, where they become a nuisance in the neighborhood. And I'm not sure quite how the language would work in and of itself, but some of the things that I would probably look at if we're given this responsibility would be how we're going to do report writing, for example. I don't know how we do it currently through the policy, but you know, obviously when the police officer responds to a call, we take everybody's name down and we go back to the police station and we complete a report as to what happened. We would put that responsibility on the ACO to come back to the station after every call, to log that in, to complete a report, to have that report reviewed by the patrol commander. We would probably put the animal control officer under the patrol responsibility. There's other things that, you know, I think I would look at, supervision, how we're gonna do court prosecution, and take those reports and how we're gonna bring those things forth to court. We've already addressed issues with the radio system because when we went to the new station, we got away from analog radio, and now we're doing digital, so we made sure that we got a radio for the ACO. One of the other, you know, even things are as far down as uniform standards and what they're going to wear to work, how they're going to present themselves, that kind of thing. And I'm just kind of thinking at the top of my head right now, but I'm sure there would be other things that would come up that I would want to put into a policy, in addition to what the Board of Selectmen policies already address. So that answers it.
Then if the chief is in favor of that wording that's being removed, I will withdraw my support for it, for the substitute motion.
That's, I mean, however the language is interpreted, I'm not going to get into that, but all I'm telling you is that I need to be able to generate policies based on what I may learn after the vote tonight and, you know, where we're going to proceed from here.
Okay, then I'll keep my support for the substitute motion because it says as directed by the chief. So I think that fulfills it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Carroll.
Hi, Bill Carroll, Precinct 4. I have a question. Right now, our current dog catcher, if he comes into a situation that is, he sees illegal type stuff, or, you know, can he arrest somebody?
I'm sorry, if he sees a what?
I'm talking to him.
Chief, go ahead. Yep.
I'm not talking to you.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Chief.
I'm sorry, can he arrest him?
I'm talking to him. I have to talk to him. He is my spokesman. You know, right now, if, let's say, the dog catcher comes over to someone's house and he walks in and he sees 5 pounds of marijuana, can he arrest that person? Or with the new way that this thing is happening, isn't that like an invasion of civil liberties by giving it to the police department, if you see my point here?
Chief?
Well, the first answer is no, he can't arrest. Marijuana is legal now, so, you know, go ahead, smoke them if you got it.
Whatever. Let's not talk marijuana. I really don't want to smoke marijuana tonight, that's for sure.
But no, if it was an arrestable offense for a police officer, obviously if the police are there and they're lawfully there for a call and they see something that's illegal, they can act on it. But the animal control officer in and of himself, no.
He doesn't, he can't act on it.
No, he can't make arrests or anything like that.
Okay, so I just want to know that fact, that's all.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Mr. Snuffer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As it would relate to a 5-pound bag, give it to the dog and it'll calm him down in no time. I'm looking at this, and every now and again, ladies and gentlemen, you come across an article, you come across a language, you come across a substitute, and you sit here and you say, 6, 6, equal, but are they? It becomes a matter of trust. I, for one, trust our particular present animal control officer. I, for one, trust our police chief. I, for one, understand that with a multiplicity of officers serving around the 24-hour period, that the original language is the best language because that gives you a full 24/7 coverage. And I look at somebody with managerial experience, departmental experience, law enforcement experience, the understanding of law, the guidance from town council, and I would oppose this and trust our town administrator, our board of selectmen, our animal control officer, and our chief of police.
Thank you, Mr. Snuffer. Any further questions or comments? There being none, we will now take a vote on the substitute motion to make it the main motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Tellers, please. Tellers in favor of the substitute motion, please raise your hands. 2. Yep, 2. Tellers opposed to the substitute motion, please raise your hand. 4, thank you. Just wanted to make sure, I thought I saw our member, but I think he's moved now, so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hampton. All those in favor of the substitute motion becoming the main motion, please rise. And stay in your place and don't mill around, please. Thank you. Mr. Sullivan on the right.
2.
Ms. Denizio.
34.
34. And Mr. Leaf on the left.
Oh, that's 14.
Thank you, Mr. Leaf. Please be seated. Ms. Barrows, can you please move forward from the break? One row down. Thank you. All those opposed to the main motion, to the substitute motion becoming the main motion, please rise. Mr. Buckley on the right.
Mr. Moderator, 22.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Ms. Denizio, the center.
34.
Thank you. And Mr. Hegler on the left.
7.
Thank you, Mr. Hegler. The motion fails 67 to 52. So we are now back to the main motion. Any further questions or comments? Mr. Moraski.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Moraski, Precinct 8. And perform such other duties as directed by the Chief of Police. When Town Council explained to this body why that was installed in the main motion, that phrase, I thought she said it was done in the event a future animal control officer would come from the ranks of the police department. Is that correct, Mr. Moderator?
Actually, thought that was Mr. Johnson that said that, but was that you, Town Council?
Mr. Moderator, the point that I had been making was that it was intended to preserve flexibility.
Okay, so in terms of that phrase and having a police officer perform those duties, would the town be required to renegotiate any part of a union contract with the police department?
Town Council?
Mr. Moderator, probably not.
Probably not.
Okay, so I'm looking...
Jim, yeah, go ahead. 1 second.
I heard the laughs out there. The probably not has to do with, they're doing it now. It's been out there. If the Norwood ACO or our ACO can't respond or are slow to respond, they're dealing with the issue now. So that's a definitive no at this time, unless the union brings it up and it's part of collective bargaining, and at that time, maybe everything's on the table. Health insurance, cost of living, etc.
Okay, Mr. Moderator, I'm looking at Chapter 5 that deals with the animal control officer. Chapter 5 of our bylaws, subsection 4, which calls for overnight coverage. And that says that during the hours of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., 7 days per week, the police department will act as animal control officer, coordinating with the full-time animal control officer any messages or complaints received daily. So to me, it looks like the police department does not perform the duties of the animal control officer, but only coordinates the calls for the animal control officer. So when the animal control officer reports to work the next day, he or she can perform the duties of whatever complaints came in. Is that an accurate statement?
Town Council?
The bylaw actually says, during the hours of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., 7 days a week, the police department will act as animal control officer. The bylaw, that portion of the bylaw isn't being changed at all. That's what it says right now. And it's not, no amendment is proposed to that provision.
But the current, through you, Mr. Moderator, but the current bylaw says will act as animal control officer, coordinating with the full-time animal control officer any messages or complaints received daily. Does the town council have that, Mr. Moderator, in her?
Town Council?
Mr. Moderator, I have a distinct feeling I'm being interrogated, which is okay.
Well, I'm asking the town moderator. I'm not asking town council, so I don't see an interrogation.
Mr. Moderator, the way that I would interpret this, and I think part of it would depend on what the past practice has actually been, but the plain language suggests to me that if something arises during the night that requires attention, the police department is dealing with it. If there's something that arises during the night that does not require immediate attention, it is being forwarded to the animal control officer to deal with. Ultimately, whether collective bargaining issues are implicated by this change, just like any other bylaw change, is something that the town administrator will be required to deal with. I wouldn't want to make a definitive statement, which is why I said probably earlier, because the town's collective bargaining obligations are the town's collective bargaining obligations.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, I want to make sure I understand this, and the problem is that we're dealing with 3 different versions. We're dealing with what is in the book, which is a more elaborate version, then apparently the Finance Committee modified it into a main motion and reduced it. Then we had a substitute motion which failed, but I want to make sure I understand what is being done here. So my understanding is that the intention of Article 15 is we're going to still have a full-time animal control officer who is appointed by the Board of Selectmen, who reports to the police chief, is currently not a sworn police officer, and the town will continue using the police department for overnight coverage, and we're sort of kind of have a difference of opinion on what that coverage entails. So the animal control officer will continue to operate out of town hall, not at the police department, and will have his own or her own separate budget, and will continue to be in charge of the pound and all of the equipment and the truck, and will handle all the calls. So is that correct, or does anybody on the stage have any differences of opinion with respect to my understanding?
Mr. Gallivan or Mr. Johnson? Mr. Gallivan first.
Sorry. So you said one thing, that the animal control officer would remain at town hall. I think that's an open question. It may make more sense to move that to the police department. I don't know that a decision has been made on that, but I think that's a valid point. Other than that, Joe, I thought that you were right on the money.
And
let's see what Jim says. So.
Going to be at the new station. There's an office there that's available, that's open to the public and not in a secured, locked area. So besides that, you're right on.
And will the animal control officer's budget be incorporated now into the police department budget, or will it continue to be separate, Mr. Moderator?
Mr. Johnson?
Right now, it's currently under the public safety budget. It's a subsection there, and at this time, I propose we leave it there, but town meetings funds it. I'm not closing the door that it will be combined, but as of right now, if you put me on the spot, Jim, what are you going to do with it? I'd leave it as is.
One more.
You heard him, folks. One more.
Animal control officer, according to the 2017 town report, has a senior clerk who reports to him currently. Will that senior clerk continue reporting, or will that senior clerk be moved to the police department?
Mr. Johnson?
Could I ask a question?
You absolutely. I think you're entitled to one question.
What year town report did you say? 2013?
No, 2017. The most current town report that we have. Now, maybe it's incorrect information. I don't know, but that's the town report that we're dealing with right now.
Okay.
The most recent.
So that particular person is stationed in the town clerk's office, Liz's office, and not only does it deal with like dog tags when you come in and get your, I want to keep that convenience there, and the intent would be to leave that person stationed up there. For the most part, that person reports to the town clerk. She sets her schedule through the town clerk, so that's to remain as is.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Ms. Hagian.
Hi, Megan Hagian, Precinct 1, Finance Committee. Quick question, the current animal control officer, does he carry a firearm with him?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, he does.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hagian. Ms. Corey?
Hi, thanks. Val Corey, Precinct 2. And I guess I'm a little bit with Joe, where I'm just sort of now a little bit confused on the whole vote. And it just all confused me. So I think someone asked, Mr. Moderator, I don't know, if there was going to be a new officer appointed for this or not, and I don't know if they did or if I didn't understand.
That question was asked and answered. Right now, Mr. Spillane is the current animal control officer, and as far as we know, will remain so.
Okay, so it's not a new police officer that would be hired or to do the role? It just would be overflow like it is currently then?
Mr. Johnson, that's my understanding at this time.
You accurately answered that question.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Okay, and one more question, if you would. What's typical? Like, I mean, is this a new trend, or what's going on with the neighboring towns? Are they all doing this kind of thing as well now? That's been proven effective or ineffective the other way?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, the chief and I have spoken about this. It's about a 50-50 split with the towns that he surveyed and that I've surveyed. Some report directly to the selectmen, some report to the police officers, police department, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking the police officers, it's just like almost maybe another burden for them, but I guess if they don't care, it just, okay, that's all I want to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corey. Mr. Chekorowski.
Philip Sharowski, Precinct 7. I move the question.
Who was that? Thank you, Mr. Breen. Thank you, Mr. Breen. I just had to hesitate for a second. The question has been moved. This requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. It is a 2/3 vote. The question has been moved. All those in favor of Article 15, this requires a simple majority vote. Please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The ayes have it. Okay, we are going to take a 5-minute break for caucus for precincts 7 and 8 for Rules Committee. Please stay close. I mean 5 minutes, okay? Go ahead. Just waiting on precinct 8, folks. Take your time, though. Take your time. Please return to your seats. We will get started with Article 18, a petition for the appropriation to reduce the fiscal year 2019 tax rate. This is a citizen's petition of Ms. Ragosta et al. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town take no action on Article 18. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted no action, 11-3-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Gallivan, Board of Selectmen.
Selectmen voted no action 3-1-1. And I would just say, Mr. Moderator, if a substitute motion is proffered, I would like to make a couple of comments.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Ms. Ragosta.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Moderator, point of order. I'd like to hear from the chairman of the Finance Committee as to the amount in question that was the vote for no action, the dollar amount.
That's not a point of order, but I'll take it as a question.
It's my question, thank you.
Then not a problem. Mr. Trudell?
Moderator, the petition that was presented was as you read it, and there was a little bit of discussion that was presented by the petitioner stating that free cash that was being addressed by the article was the free cash of $6,300,000 approximately. And in our deliberations, we went back and forth over several items, and that was the basis by which the motion for no action was taken. After the vote was taken and recorded, I was one of the dissenting votes. We had additional discussions, and we were trying to clarify through town council and town administrator where it is a certification by percentage as of a date, what was the actual certified cash as of that date, and it was reported to us that it was slightly over 200,000 because the state had not done their certification, and that certification did not become effective until August. And the thing is, through our deliberations also, we were told that you either vote favorable action, no action, or return to petitioner, so we could not then turn around and change a date or change the percentage or actually specify a dollar amount based on that information.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Ms. Regusta?
Thank you for that clarification. Despite this ruling by the chairman of the Finance Committee, I'd like everyone in this body to know that the town administrator and the Finance Committee were very much aware that the citizens' petition was requesting 25% of the free cash balance of $6.3 million. Mr. Damish and I presented that amount for the Finance Committee for their deliberation, and that's the amount that they voted no action on. The town administrator's calculation of the average tax savings in his memo in your RTM packet clearly derives from a $1.6 million tax reduction. But that being said, here we are, and I will still advocate for the Walpole taxpayers. Article 18 encapsulates the concerns and frustrations of at least the 200-plus Walpole taxpayers who signed the petition. I and other RTMs in this body have heard from many taxpayers all over the spectrum who are struggling to keep up with the enormously escalating real estate taxes in Walpole. This article takes a step toward addressing this by returning to taxpayers 25% of the town's budget surplus, known as free cash, in the form of a reduced tax bill in 2019. So what is free cash? Simply put, free cash is the town's budget surplus. Another way of putting it is that it's the amount of money left over at the end of the year after all town revenues have been collected and all of the town's budgeted expenses have been spent or appropriated. Since 2013, the town's average amount of free cash has been about $6.2 million per year. If just 25% of the surplus generated over the last 5 years had been shared with the taxpayers, there would have been a significant slowdown of the tax rate increases. It would have resulted in an average of $1.5 million being rebated back to the taxpayers each year. Think about what these tax savings could have meant to taxpayers. More money in the pockets of homeowners, renters, and businesses. Think about the possibilities of what Walpole taxpayers could have done with that $1.5 million each year. Among other things, taxpayers could have spent more money on Walpole businesses. Businesses could have invested in their operations, hired more employees, and perhaps not have had to increase their prices so much. Landlords might not have had to increase the rents on their tenants. Renters might have been able to save more money for a down payment on a house in Walpole. No matter how you divide it up among the taxpayers, it would have been a potential $1.5 million being plowed back into the Walpole economy in each of the last 5 years. Rather than returning any of the surplus revenues back to the taxpayers, town government has chosen to spend the free cash every year. The articles voted on last week to encumber virtually every penny of free cash is evidence of that.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Snuffer, point of order.
The motion is for no action.
Correct, Mr. Snuffer. Ms. Regusta, do you have a substitute motion?
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to vote on this no action main motion first and see how that goes, and I do have a substitute motion to be, a motion to be presented if Article 18 is defeated.
I'm sorry, say that you want, once we vote on the no action, the matter is closed.
Mr. Moderator, my reading of town meeting rules does not state that. Can I read town meeting rules for?
I disagree with your interpretation. Once the no action is moved, that's the main motion. So that would be it. The only thing that could be done at that time would be reconsideration of the exact same vote, and that is it. So if you have a substitute motion, you should move it before we take the vote on the main motion.
Mr. Moderator, may we ask Town Council on
I will ask
Section
Town
3 on
Council-
Article...
I will ask Town Council.
Article 3, Section 3, Article debate of the town meeting rules.
Ms. Regusta, I stand corrected.
Thank you.
You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And as I said, depending on the vote of this article, if it's defeated, I do have a substitute motion. Or I guess I would move. I have a motion. I'm continuing. Thank you. Rather than returning any of the surplus revenues back to the taxpayers, town government has chosen to spend the free cash every year. The articles voted on last week to encumber virtually every penny of free cash is evidence of that. This is about priorities. Town government and a majority of this town meeting evidently thought it more important to spend the surplus rather than return any of it to the taxpayers. From 2008 to 2018, the average real estate tax bill on a single-family residence in Walpole increased 51%, from $4,900 to $7,400. At this rate, in 8 years, that figure will be almost $11,000. That's an outrageous amount and unaffordable for Walpole residents. What would that amount be if a $200 million school facilities override passes? What would it be if a $50 million override passes, or any override for that matter? 10 years ago, Walpole ranked 67th in the state for highest average single-family tax bills and 71st in per capita income. Today, we rank 60th highest in average single-family tax bills and only 77th in per capita income. Our tax bills are clearly outpacing our residents' ability to pay them. Using free cash as a one-time expenditure to reduce the tax levy is not uncommon. Municipalities all over Massachusetts have done it, including recently Westwood, Framingham, Worcester, and Cambridge. Several concerns have been expressed by the Finance Committee and some RTMs regarding this particular use of free cash, including the impact it would have on the town's credit rating. Using free cash for this purpose will not impact our credit rating any differently than spending it does, which, I might add, is exactly what this body has done at this town meeting. Using free cash to fund a one-time reduction in the tax rate cannot create a deficit because it's using surplus funds and it's not a commitment to spend future revenues. Applying free cash to the levy will have no impact on the town's levy limit. The levy limit calculation is independent of using free cash to reduce the tax rate. Look at the handout from the hallway table for those of you who bothered to take it. You can see for yourself that nowhere in the tax levy limit calculation is there anything called free cash use. A yes vote on that recommendation on the screen, the no action recommendation, is essentially telling the taxpayers of Walpole, you can't have it back. We have plans for your surplus. It will be telling the taxpayers of Walpole that they are not viewed by town government as the individuals upon whose backs this town exists. not viewed as the individuals who have every right to expect that their town government doesn't use their hard-earned money as the wishing well from which every shiny new object can be purchased or built, that the taxpayers themselves don't know what best serves their own needs. A yes vote would be a tremendous disservice to the taxpayers who have built this town, who have put down roots in this town, and are telling us that they deserve a return of some of the surplus that their taxes have created. This body could have placed but a brief pause on the extravagant spending in this warrant. We've just built 3 large and expensive facilities in Walpole totaling over $30 million. Isn't it time to just step back and take a breath? Isn't it time to prioritize our constituents who wish to keep just a bit more of their own money where it belongs in their pockets? I and the citizens who signed this petition, and the many others who did not have an opportunity to sign it, are asking that this body vote no on the main motion that you see on the screen. And then I will submit a substitute motion. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Ms. Ragusta, just for clarification, I want to make sure we're clear, because it does say in your section is that after defeat of the no action motion, so you'd have to prevail and defeat the no action
Understood.
for you to be able to submit the motion. You're clear on that, right?
Understood, which is why I'm asking for a no vote.
Okay, but I just
yes,
wanted to be
I
clear,
am-
because if the no vote prevails,
Yep.
then you wouldn't be able to, okay, good, okay, I'm clear on that, thank
I
you.
appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
No problem. Mr. Trudell, you had further comments.
Yes, the handout that was provided in the RTM package for Article 18 does give sources of free cash for the prior 3 years, and I just take exception to some of the balances that were addressed. Talking about approximately $6 million on average being out there every year. For 3 consecutive years, there was the same $1.7 million being carried from one year to the next because we weren't sure if the town was going to need those funds for either snow emergencies, legal issues, and various other items for special ed and so forth, because the town was in a situation where special ed students were moving in and out. These snowstorms in the prior history was saying that it could have been worse years, and we actually got favorable for 2 of those years. And then in one of those years, we actually got federal funding back for snow removal. So the free cash that we used in the spring ended up getting refunded to us in the fall. And with regards to the long-term debt, that's one-time timing differences. We budgeted as if we were going to have to start making the mortgage payments per se on the various buildings and so forth that were going up. But because of the construction timing and the timing of the loans being taken out, we didn't have to make the debt payments in that particular year, but we're making up for them now and in future years. So the $6 million average is probably closer to a $4.5 million average. And so just for the RTM's sake, you know, free cash sounds like a great number, but you have to look at the details of what's generating it. And those are just some additional facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Snuffer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Snuffer, Precinct 2. My fellow RTM members, in the spirit of the word community, it needs to be said that every inhabitant of the town of Walpole invests either emotionally, fiscally, or spiritually in our collective success. However, as it relates to Article 18, I am suggesting to you that there is a huge difference between our prudent investments and reckless free cash spending. For a moment, let's reflect on our history. Since our founding in 1724, we essentially became a content old mill town. Excuse me. 50 or 60 years ago, we began to change that required investing, but investing took quite a while in conservative Walpole. 20-plus years ago, the town meeting made the right and prudent decision to invest in Adams Farm. The voter agreed, several hundreds of biodiverse acres were preserved, the debt now fully retired. At that same town meeting, it approved the purchase of the Elm Street School for $1 million, saving our community tens of millions of dollars. Let's reflect on our infrastructure in the last 50 years of decline, delay, and decay. Past town meetings on behalf of all the people of Walpole began the corrective action process. They determined it was the right and prudent decision to invest in a new police facility, a new fire facility, a new senior center, a new DPW maintenance garage, a new library that, despite a contentious vote, has proven to be a most valuable community asset, dredging and supporting new life for our Memorial Pond and our winter recreational jewel, Turner's Pond. You funded the Jarvis Farm purchase and protected our water while getting a side benefit of controlled recreational activity. At this town meeting, you continued investing in the start of seriously needed recreational facilities. We spent tens of millions of dollars repairing our aging schools. The future will require us to seriously focus on our educational facilities. My fellow RTM, our world, our country, our state, our town have witnessed the tragic rise of belligerent, aggressive, divisive politics. Please recognize that you have spent wisely. All those mentioned investments are fiscally responsible and will benefit every Walpole citizen for decades to come. You have seen Walpole rise from contamination to rejuvenation. For some, do not resent the fact that through town meeting's efforts, Walpole has become a greater, stronger community. Town meeting needs to be thanked, not scolded. Stand with me, vote no action on this article, and continue investing wisely, and be proud to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Snuffer. Mr. Hamilton? Excuse me, Mr. Salvatore, did you wish to speak now? You're allowed to jump in front. You're a member of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Hamilton, you'll have to, defer to Mr. Salvatore.
Thank you, Moderator Bruce. I appear before this body to speak and ask you to reject the Finance Committee's motion, and so that we can eventually pass Article 18. Rule 2E3 of your town meeting rules, in the section that discusses the order of speakers, states that I am allowed to speak as a town official or town committee member, including ex officio members, according to the town charter, whose duties or committee have relevance to this motion. So I appreciate this opportunity to speak before your body, and I will only take a short amount of your time. As you know, free cash is at its simplest form, revenues received but not allocated to a specific expense. I agree that it is proper to make conservative estimates of incoming revenue in case the revenue doesn't come in as expected, or in case there are some unforeseen expenditures at the end of the year. However, from 2004 to 2011, we were conservative, and we were seeing free cash come in at an average of $2.8 million. From 2012 to 2018, that number has nearly doubled. And even with Mr. Trudell's statement, there is an additional $2 million that has come in under free cash. When revenues exceed expenditures and estimates, it is my view that we all should not be spent on new things. While it definitely is appropriate to hold off on some capital spending to make sure that the money is available for that year, we shouldn't be spending the entire lot of money. When it is sufficiently large as it is this year, it is my view that we should do one of three things. Put more money into reserve funding, as you have at this town meeting. 2, pay down debt, or 3, return some money to the taxpayer. When free cash comes in at such large numbers as it did this year, it has 3 detrimental effects. Free cash, by definition, is cash that's not available during the spring town meeting or during the spring budget process to be allocated between the departments. So free cash, this money that these overly conservative estimates, this money does not is not part of the pull and tug of the budget process. Less is available then in the springtime for allocation than would be if we had predicted better, had lower free cash numbers. So if this year, instead of coming in with $6.3 million in free cash estimates, if our estimates had been less conservative, we would have had $4.2 million perhaps of free cash available. And then we would have a couple of million that either could be part of the spring allocations or could be used for real estate tax relief. By having this money out of the spring budget process, there's no pull and tug as to how to spend this money between fire and school needs, police and DPW needs, or senior service and recreation needs. This money ends up just in the fall town meeting with you, instead of being able to decide priorities as the Finance Committee and the Capital Budget Committee should be able to do, you're only given the opportunity to give an up or down vote on spending. And the second bad effect is that because the money is here, we tend to more freely spend it. It doesn't seem so difficult to spend on the ponds or spend on certain things when you say that there's, this excess revenue for this particular year. And so I think it should be part of the big pot of money.
Mr. Salvatore, are you wrapping up your comments?
I'm pretty close.
Is the body clear to let Mr. Salvatore continue? Yes. Thank you. Continue, Mr. Salvatore.
So I think it should all be in discussion in the spring, both on the capital budget side and the regular budget side. And because real estate tax revenue is pretty easy to predict, what happens is it's the other revenues that are more, changeable. And it's those other revenues that get underpredicted that result in the free cash amounts, the higher free cash amounts. So therefore, what the budget process necessarily does is, over the last 10 years, or at least as long as I've been paying attention, is tax to the maximum, and then underestimate the other revenues so that you have the maximum real estate coming in. What really should be happening is, if we made a real good estimate of what the free cash is going to be, we could give some relief to the real estate taxpayer because we would know that there's more money available. And this year, I would say that there's $2 or $3 million that should have been looked at as a reduction of the real estate tax obligation. So when revenues come in far above estimates like they do this year, we should pay down debt, as I said. And one of the things we ought to look at in future town meetings is the fire department bonds. Those were not as good deals as the other bonds that we got this year, the last several years. And that might be a good place to start to pay down some debt in the event that we have money in excess of revenue, excess of expectations in the future. But I think seriously we ought to be looking at giving some relief to the real estate taxpayer. And because in this budget cycle, this money was not available in the spring, we weren't able to do that. What Article 18 does is make up for that fact and give some of that money back. And so I ask the body to reject the Finance Committee's main motion so that the version of Article 18 that will be the substitute motion will pass. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Mr. Hamilton, excuse me, 1 second, Mr. Gallivan. Folks, just as a reminder, there is a 3-minute limit on speakers. I'm trying to be a little liberal. I do want to point out, you're probably thinking, well, people were going on for 5 or 6 minutes the other night. I let some of that go because there was a lot of Q&A, and I tried to allow for the response, is to not take away your time. So just ask you to keep that back in mind. I will go to the folks out here, but I'd like to see most people, as many people as possible, talk, because I hate to see anybody left sitting, waiting to speak for the first time when the question gets moved. So just my notes in there. Mr. Gallivan, Mr. Hamilton. Thank you. Mr. Hamilton?
Hamilton, Precinct 5. I move to give Ms. Linda Coletti my 3 minutes.
Ms. Cooley is not a member of this body, and RTM members, if the body wants to basically give your time up and let Ms. Cooley, who is not an elected RTM member, step in front of them, I will let them decide on that. But normally a non-RTM member is the bottom of the order, unfortunately. Body? Noes? It's pretty close. I'm going to hold off on that right now. Mr. Hamilton, why don't you come back in a little bit and try it then?
Then I'll use my 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton.
Is the clock running now?
I just restarted it, okay?
Okay. I speak in favor of no action. I mean, stopping the no action for this article. I will vote against no action. I think that we've heard a lot of good information. It's time we started giving consideration to the taxpayers, and the taxpayers are very interested in having some money returned to them. So I think by voting this no action down and coming in with a good substitute motion, the taxpayers will be made very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Gallivan?
Moderator. I wanted to speak, I'm in favor of the motion of no action. There's been a fair amount of fake news out there along the way. And one of the things is that we have a process that we've used for over 20 years, where we go through and conservatively estimate our budgets. Then there'll be money that is determined to be free cash by the state. We use that free cash to do a lot of our projects, so we depend on that. So it's not like our process is broken. I believe our process is in fact working. And if you think about some of the things that we've used our free cash on recently, former Selectman Snuffer talked about, police, fire, DPW, council on aging. But also last year in the spring, we purchased a fire truck, a police car, we buy DPW vehicles, we buy scuba packs, the air packs for the fire department. We fund a lot of things at the schools, a lot of repairs, doors, windows, roofs. We also do Chromebooks. In the past, we've done computers. We've done dam repair. We're doing Memorial Pond dredging. So it is part of our process. And I understand that there are people who need assistance because taxes are getting high for them. And I'm all in favor of increasing our ability to give the people that need tax assistance more. And last year we did pass an article raising the limits of what we could provide to people who need assistance. And I'm in favor, and I know there's people here who have talked to me about doing more at the next town meeting or a year from now, and I'm all in favor of that. But I think it is important to realize that our process is not broken. It is the process. Cities and towns are allowed to tax up to the levy limit of 2.5%. And the reason we do that is we have many things that need to be done in the town that we can't otherwise get to. And it's important to take a look at the whole town when we spend our money, when we look at free cash, when we decide on what projects to pay for. And it's also important to note that all general spending, operating, capital, free cash, borrowing, is reviewed and voted on by the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, capital budget as appropriate, school committee as appropriate, and town meeting. Town meeting gets the ultimate say on what you vote on and how to approve everything. So it's not like we haven't seen all these things. I've been a selectman for 8 years, and before that I was 6 years on Finance Committee. So I've seen a lot of warrants come through. I've seen us fund a lot of really good projects. And I would just ask you not to lose sight of the fact that the process does work. And you're all here tonight, and you're going to get a chance to vote on it. And remember that it is our process to take the free cash and reallocate it to the projects that we have that are high priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Galvin. Mr. Pila. No. Yeah. Thank you for your chivalry, Mr. Pila.
To you, Mr. Moderator, a few questions, and then I would like to make a statement. Richard Peeler, Precinct 7. Has the town engaged in assessing all of its needs? Has it put together something like a 5-year plan by looking at all of the infrastructure requirements, whether they be the schools, whether they be water and sewer lines, whether they be the police station, fire station, projects that have been completed? How far out has the town gone to look at the town as a whole and say, for us to be able to deliver the services and the amenities that the townspeople would like in their community? Has that been done at all?
That's many committees, but Mr. Trudell, does the Finance Committee care to make a statement on that?
Yeah, there is a 5-year plan, and as free cash becomes available and debt becomes available, capital budget meets with the town administrator to put together their priorities. But there are always those items that are basically off the schedule because they never know when the funds will be available. And that was the case with police, fire, senior center, DPW garage. We were looking to see when's the time we can make this work, and as free cash was building up to certain points, we said we can do this now, and there's enough room in the debt budget, we can go forward with these projects. That's the same that's happening with the fields. We were looking at it and saying, we know we need fields. For 15 years we knew we need fields, and the town acted to get property, and now the town is in a position where we have some free cash. We're getting close to finding more debt room in the debt budget, so that in the spring they hope to come forward with a comprehensive package to go forward with the fields package. So there is a 5-year plan, but there are always those items off the table that don't always show up. There should be a footnote in the 5-year plan that these are our priorities, they just don't know when, but they haven't actually been put on as footnotes, but they should be.
To you, Mr. Moderator, is that 5-year plan documented? Has it been put forth to town meeting and to the general public? So, because it's very easy for one to get the impression that things are done on a whim. And if there is a 5-year plan, however long the plan is, and it has indicated all of those items, it would be a lot easier to understand and digest and rationalize why certain monies should be appropriated.
Mr. Johnson?
So yes, I'm glad the question was asked. There is multiple multi-year plans. Here are just a few. The McGuire report, the field study that was commissioned that I mentioned under my report. We also have the master plan that is in need of updating. And in back of your town meeting warrant that is mailed out to all the residents of Walpole, I think we mailed more than 7,000 out. You have the 5-year plan. And last year we went ahead and added a column in there called out-year estimates. This plan is constantly evolving through the leadership of Chairman Ed Forsberg. They constantly update this plan. It's, a truck could fall apart in get moved up, that's 1 or 2 years out. That's happened on multiple occasions. So there are multiple plans out there, and I've made sure that all of this is documented on the website. It's available up there, and I've tried to make it as simple as possible to search for. So if you were to go on the town's website and type in Field Master Plan, it's one of the first things in the search engine there, so.
At the last, through you, Mr. Moderator, at the last 2 sessions, there were a number of people who spoke in favor of and gave very good reasons why they were supporting something. There are those town meeting members who like to ask questions, who it's their responsibility to ask questions so that they can explain those issues to their respective constituents. I would not like certain members of town meeting or the town to feel that there are a group of people that are always to say no. That's not the answer. That's not the point. The point is that when you're dealing in municipal finance and you're dealing with tax dollars, it is our responsibility, it is incumbent upon every single member of this body to really fully understand what is involved. We have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of this town. Free cash, there's nothing free about free cash. And that is something that we have to look at. And that's why knowing what the master plan is and the projects, so then we can begin to distinguish between needs and wants. But for us to for us to have excess dollars every year, there's something wrong with that. And that's why I just want to make this one statement, that is the reason why we need zero-based budgeting in this town. There is no reason why we should be having the excesses that we do for the reasons that Selectman Salvatore mentioned and also Selectwoman Augusta. My point is that if there is money, excess money, and it cannot be justified that it's needed to be spent on certain items, that money doesn't belong to us. It doesn't belong to this body. That money belongs to the taxpayers. And there are taxpayers who ask the question, what do I get for these dollars? To some members, especially those who have young families, the school system, the quality of the schools is #1 priority. But there are other people who are not in that situation. And I think we have to understand that. Just like you expect those folks to understand what your concerns are, we owe it to the people that are not in this room, that are paying the freight, why we spend the money that we spend. And then we also have to be able to explain to them why we're not able to return some of the tax dollars. I am opposed to the no action on this article for the reason that we owe it to the taxpayers. It's their money, and if we can't carve out $1.5 million out of an almost $100 million budget, then we are not doing our jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pia. Mr. Kelly.
Joseph Kelly, Precinct 7. I'm in favor of giving the cash back to the taxpayers, and the reasons are not because I want cash back. I own several properties in the town, but I am appalled by the way our tax dollars are being spent. That's what made me run for an RTM, and I think all of us as RTMs need to get together and discuss this prior to see what each of us is really thinking and what we want. I was appalled because this town gave me a settlement agreement of $60,000 for my daughter, who they failed miserably in the school system. There are very many teachers in this.
Excuse me, folks, I got it. Mr. Kelly, please speak to the article. I don't think the school system.
Well, this is about taxes, and another person brought in.
Keep it focused on.
I am.
Keep focused. Thank you.
I am focused. I am focused. There was $60,000 of my dollars that were going to go out the door. I turned that down. I would have got more. I turned it down because I could afford to send my daughter to another school, and I didn't want to take money away from other kids in the school system, right? So I don't think there's many of you in this room that wouldn't have taken the money. I didn't, so I feel like I can talk like this and not be told that I'm looking for something and question my patriotism because I disagree with the way money's being spent. This is prudent investment. If one person thinks it's a prudent investment, and I disagree with what is prudent and good, that's diversifying us. For instance, the ball fields. You may think it was a good idea to have ball fields, but I don't think we're doing the kids any justice. I think money would have been better spent setting up a networking system, getting these kids into jobs and in fields that they may use in the future. Enough of the ball fields. I get it with the sports and everything, but who decides on what is necessary? And all I hear here is the town's needs. What about families' needs? I give many people great discounts on their rent because they can't afford the rent, right? I put up where I can. I'm not a charity, I'm a businessman. But I do what I can do when I can do it. And the other thing is, what about your children when they go to buy a home and they go to file for a mortgage and they key in and they're $50 below the thing and they can't qualify for a mortgage? Does anybody think of those things? You know, I don't mind spending money. I get where you have to spend money, but spend it prudently, and let's get our money's worth. We're just blowing money. The school, people say, you said we spent $14 million repairing the school. When I walk in there, I asked for the walkthrough in the school. I didn't go in there half-cocked thinking what I was going to say, that we don't need a new school or we need a new renovation. When I went in there, I asked, why is this school in this repair? How did we get to this point? All right? And what now I'm asking myself, if we have a school that's in such disrepair, why are we giving those same people the money to move forward with the new school? We're supposed to have checks and balances so things work for the benefit of the town, and that's not what's happening here. And people will get up here and say, well, $170, what am I going to do with that? Last year, someone said they could buy a bicycle chain. I can get you a whole bike for $170. But, you know, I get homeless people that come in, they're living in my basements and some of my units and stuff. Who decides what is necessary in this town? I mean, ball fields, $10 million in ball fields, and I give you a refund to some church or something where they can help people. But we have to stop being divided and start uniting, because I want good education for you. Nobody cares about kids as much as I do. So I don't want to hear that you're not patriotic and you don't want to have a school and you don't want to give to this and you don't want to give to that. I love kids, and I think they deserve the benefit of the future. We were up here in the schools talking about the future of the way it's going to be, get into the 21st century. We're not going into the 21st century. There's nothing about a plan for teaching kids how to do plumbing and electric. These are jobs that...
Mr. Kelly, I think you're getting a little off target.
Well, no more than anybody else has been, but that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Corey.
Thank you. Val Corey, Precinct 2. Mr. Moderator, there's a number of reasons why I imagine you would think that I would be against this article. But mostly the reason is I think that sometimes we do forget. This was a citizen's petition, which means it was signed by 200 citizens. And I'm sure there could have been more signatures if time was given. I think that we need to remember that I think that the citizens' request should take priority, honestly, and given a lot of thought over just what the town meeting personal reps' desires or wants or even the town's needs are. These are the citizens. It was a citizen's petition, which I believe is one of the reasons why I guess I found out typically it's supposed to be put first above the others, because it's not a government petition.
Ms. Corey,
so I think that's important.
that was already voted and decided. Please stay on topic.
Okay, I thought that was part of the topic. So that's one of the reasons I'm against it, because of so many citizens being against it as well. One of the other things is I think it would show really a good amount of faith. Good faith, because the taxes are very high in Walpole. And for those who are in the real estate industry, which I have several family members and friends in the real estate industry in Walpole and Norwood and the surrounding areas, that does affect the sales of the properties for people. People are looking, the taxes are getting higher and higher, they're looking elsewhere, just like what happened to Sharon recently. So I think that you have to consider the downfall of high taxes too, because that's very important, and it's pricing people out of Walpole. We shouldn't be pricing people out of Walpole who are middle-class people. And I appreciate that many people, with what the man up here just mentioned, I don't know, $200 or whatever he said, and I appreciate that maybe that is crumbs for some people over the course of a year, $200, $400 to get everything you mentioned. I mean, that's a great deal on your money. But the point is, it's a loaf of bread for a lot of people. And all these things are supporting the younger generation, which is great, but we're pricing our younger generation out of Walpole, not just because of the real estate market being just ridiculously high everywhere, but because they are looking at the tax rates. They're looking at it. They're going to Norwood, they're going to Foxborough, and I think that's a real strong consideration. It's just not always good to have more things but price people out because your taxes are so high. And I just have, a quick question, if you don't mind, Mr. Moderator, to address to Mark, because I didn't read this whole paper, to be honest with you. I saw the bolded things, but I mean, he held it up and he said there's fake news going around. So I think if you could ask him to point out what's the fake news on this yellow sheet, it would help me. Maybe it would help other people. I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Gallivan?
I think the first piece of fake news is that it says that these are my pet projects, and nothing could be further from the truth. All of the projects that I've seen us do over the last 20 years are for all the people of Walpole, not me. So that's the first piece of fake news. Lots of other stuff in there too, but I'll keep it short.
Okay, I didn't even see that, but I guess I'm talking, so maybe that's fake news. But I thought you were maybe, when you said that, you were maybe referring more to the things that were bulleted or something, that had to do with the spending. So was it fake news? I saw that now, spend on the, was it fake news about the bulleted items? Because those are the things that really are affecting the vote, the fiscal items. Because if it is fake news, I want to know, because I'm looking at this, and that's helping me make my decision one way or the other. So, and maybe other people, like I said, could you tell me? Could he tell me?
So could you ask a specific question?
Sure. I would like to know, other than saying their personal pet project, which I'm sure they're not, perhaps, I don't know, but I would like to know as far as the actual content of the bulleted points that mention money. What is the fake news on this yellow sheet of paper?
Ms. Corey, I don't know that they have the yellow sheet with them. Could you actually ask a specific question instead of a broad general one?
Okay, but it might take more than 3 minutes. Is it fake news that a down payment of $1.5 million toward an $11 million athletic field project was made?
So I think in that statement that you just made, the $11 million figure, I think is fake news, because this body has not committed to an $11 million project. We did set aside $1.5 million to be used toward a project, and once the design is complete, that will be bid out, and we'll determine how much field we can support through the 1.5 million as well as some borrowing. So I think to just put a shocking number out there of 11 million at this stage is not appropriate.
Okay. Is it fake news that 1.5 million feasibility study for a new high school at the cost of $150 to $250 million would result in another override on the ballot?
Ms. Corey, no, we're not entertaining an override on this question.
I understand. I just think, he said it
well,
was
you
fake
can rephrase.
news.
Please rephrase your question. We're not entertaining an override.
Okay.
And I'm not going to have you go through that entire
I
piece.
appreciate that, but
Okay.
I think he held the paper up, so I think he does have it. But I'm just saying, don't say everything's fake news unless, like a specific thing is really fake news, I guess. And that's how I'm going to base my vote if I'm reading this or if I'm reading something to be positive and vote positively on it. I'd like to just know if the facts I'm reading on either end are really fake or are really not. And I think that would help everyone. So I guess if there's anything that is really wrong with this, maybe you can mention it. Thank you.
As I said, Ms. Corey, a lot of this information falls under the category of fake news. I did not say everything was fake. I just think it's inappropriate to mix real information with information that's made up. So I think it's important to be accurate.
Thank you, Ms. Corey. Ms. Gallivan.
Nancy Gallivan, Precinct 8. I'm concerned about Article 18 for a reason that hasn't been mentioned yet. I am in support of no action on Article 18. I think that fiscal stability is hard to achieve and it should be valued. And I'm particularly concerned about what this does to the operating budget. The Walpole Public School System, which is the thing that I pay the most attention to, is very strong and effective, but our spending, even though it's a lot of money, is below the state average. It's below the average of towns nearby. We work really hard and normally find ways to do more with less, but it concerns me that if Article 18 were to pass and we were going to give back this money to the taxpayers, that we'll be causing a significant deficit in the FY20 operating budget. When we start our budgeting and you look at how things are done on the revenue side, you start by looking at how much money has been brought in the previous year. And Proposition 2.5 says you're allowed to apply 2.5% growth to that number. And if we bring in $1.6 million less of revenue this year, because we give it back to the taxpayer, we're starting with $1.6 million less in our calculations. Typically, over the last 5 years, as we've applied the 2.5% to the previous year's revenue, and then you add on what's called new growth, things like the Siemens project or the apartment buildings downtown. The typical amount of revenue that can be shared among all the departments is about $2.8 million. But if we give back 1.6, that would bring us down to about $1.2 million. And the first thing that we have to do before we even decide about the 66-34 split is we have to pay our what's called non-discretionary costs. We pay for our trash, we pay for our health insurance costs, we pay for debt and state assessments and things like that. The typical amount of what we've needed to do for those costs over the last 5 years has been about $1.3 million, which means that we're not going to have any money to share among the school department, the police department, any of our departments if we do this. And so my major concern is that we'll be causing our own deficit and we'll end up having to either make very significant cuts next year. Possibly it's starting us on the road to the next operational override. Or the other option is we could double up on the tax increase on the taxpayer to say that was a mistake, we need to make up for it. I am really concerned about what would happen in FY20, and I think it's a significant piece of information that hasn't been talked about.
Thank you, Ms. Gallivan. Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim O'Neill, Precinct 8. I'm also a member of the Board of Selectmen, and I'm a citizen, too. Mr. Moderator, through you to the town administrator, Jim, do we have a view on what happens year after year after year if we take monies away from the tax levy in any given year?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I do. If you'll indulge me, I won't run through the whole PowerPoint I put together. I have a couple of charts that kind of demonstrate what I think maybe Nancy was hinting at, and now Mr. O'Neill. Do you mind?
Yes, proceed.
Okay, guys, you want to call up my presentation? I'll tell you when to stop. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. I'm not going to rehash what's already been discussed. Just next slide. Next slide, I might have you guys go back to that. Okay, so this is the compounding impact year over year by using free cash. My general concern is because with this article is that...
Yes, Mr. Valencourt? Excuse me, Mr. Valencourt, I think Mr. O'Neill's question was as about the compounding impact of it, which I think is year over year.
So my question was, could I clarify my question?
Absolutely, Mr. O'Neill.
My question is about a one-time give back of money and what the impact of that one-time reduction to the levy is year over year over year.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. That was my understanding too.
So with no set plan, I have to run scenarios. That's my job, to know what may be coming up next. So here are the long-term impacts of consistently reusing the tax rate to, roughly 1% to 2% each year. If this action is taken, it's not a one-time event. Each year, the town will fall behind in projects such as school improvements and replacement equipment will not get funded.
Mr. Valencourt,
I want everyone here to know that the impacts
Excuse me, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Valencourt, this is on another topic, right? Mr. Valencourt, please, you're Mr. O'Leary, Mr. Valencourt, please cease and desist and let him finish his presentation.
So bottom line, just to skip to the end, the long-term impacts here could be just over 5 years, about $23 million. Over 10 years, it'll go up to $87 million. Clearly, that's not viable. By compounding year over year using free cash, the town would go bankrupt.
So Jim, is it safe to say that, through you, Mr. Moderator, to the town administrator, is it safe to say that a one-time give back of money from the tax levy actually has out-year effects to it?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, it is, because once you use that, it's gone. You can't go back and get that million or so, or whatever it is.
And that's real news, right? That's not fake news?
Sure.
Okay. Is there any way that you could correct that? If, let's say, in year 2 or year 3, you decided that it was a mistake to give back the money, is there a way to correct that?
Mr. Johnson?
Go back one slide, guys. So you could go back, and this scenario shows basically it's an up and down hill here. You got the current year, which is on the far left side there, and then if we take this action, it would be to dip the taxes down, and then it would spike back up. If town meeting and the finance committee want to do this, it would be a roller coaster there.
Thank you. So I'm in favor of the no action on this article, and my reasons are very simple. This has a multi-year effect, even though it is a one-time give back, and it's very important that you understand that. That slide that Jim had up a minute ago makes that point very clearly. It is a multi-year impact, and it only gets corrected if you raise taxes back up to the levy limit. And so it is very important that people understand that we're building in a structural deficit into our process. On the point of free cash, and it's been said, so I'm not going to just repeat it, but our use of free cash has been really smart. We've limited it to one-time expenditures, and that has proven to be a real boon to us, to allow us to be able to do the things that we have been able to do over the last 10 or 15 years. So having that free cash allows us to stay on top of those capital expenditures so that we don't find ourselves in capital deficit. If we don't continue that, we're going to run up against a problem where we're not going to be able to cover our capital, and we will begin to erode our operating budget. I don't think that's a place anybody wants to be. So, to reiterate, it's not a one-time event. This is a compounding event that will go out year after year after year, and I'm in favor of no action on this article. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Valencourt.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Valencourt, Precinct 5. I want to address some of the comments that were recently made and illustrate an example and set the record straight. I'm a past member of the Finance Committee and Chairman of the Finance Committee. This certainly is a one-time event. It does not have compounding effects. Compare it to the $1.5 million that we just approved for the school study. Okay, it's analogous to that. Or the $1 million that we approved out of free cash to dredge Memorial Pond. Did we hear anyone in this body stand up and cry that the sky is falling and we'll have structural deficits from spending those monies? No. This is the same thing, okay? To Mrs. Gallivan's point, it doesn't impact the operating budget one iota. Everyone has the handout of Article 18 that demonstrates the levy limit. So the operating budget for next year will be fully assessed at the 2.5% increase. This use of free cash doesn't impact that whatsoever. The schools will be funded to the extent they were with this increase, as will all the other salaried positions in the town. So I know the town finance is confusing with all the jargon and some of the shell games that appear to be played, but this is not the case, okay? This does not have structural deficits. So just wanted to, again, and so want to talk about a couple of things. You know, I'm all in favor of conservative budgeting. I don't think, I consider myself very conservative, but I think there's a difference between what people in the private sector might call sandbagging, okay? So revenues are grossly understated, and the handout that you have showing the sources of the free cash, it doesn't display expenditures. So we've also significantly underspent on expenditures. You look at FY18, and to the chairman of the Finance Committee's point, the 1.7 million carryover is now 200,000, but in FY18 alone, we generated 6 million just in excess revenues. Many of these, if you look at the trend line across the page, one would ask, why are we so over with so many of these things each and every year? Motor vehicle receipts being one that were frequently over by $1 million, thereabouts, or more. Debt, I find it hard to understand why the leaders of this town can't accurately budget debt, when we're going to begin projects, when we're going to start servicing those debt. I may, once or twice occasionally, it may make sense, but every single year to be over budgeting on the debt, and then this money all gets swept into free cash. What this does is it puts artificial squeeze on the operating budget and an artificial squeeze on keeping the tax rate at 2.5%. This money is taken off the table and is subject to the priorities of other priorities and not subject to the scrutiny of the budgeting and the debate process. The rest of the operating budgets, they could benefit from having this money front and center to discuss and debate in front of this body. We talk about a history. Mr. Gallivan talked about the history of how we've managed free cash. If you look at the handout, which is mostly facts, there's a little bit of editorializing in here, but all of the rest of these are facts. The median level of free cash for 2014 through 2011 was $2.6 million. The median for 2012 through 2018 is $7.3 million. So we've clearly gone off the rails here with pumping up free cash. And people frequently mention the police station, the fire station, the DPW. Everyone that's been an RTM for a while knows that initially that was pushed by an override that passed this body. And the taxpayers, thank God, stood up and said no. And they were forced to use free cash and to be prudent about it. Let's not kid ourselves and take credit where credit is not due.
Mr. Valencourt, please wrap up your comments.
Sure. And I agree that the cost of home ownership is rising rapidly, and with the increasing taxes, that's putting more pressure and pricing more people, particularly new buyers, out of home ownership. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valencourt. Mr. Barrett. Mr. Barrett.
Hello, Ben Barrett, Precinct 7. I'm a first-year RTM, so shout out to all the first-year RTMs out there that this is their first time going through it and we're on day 3, so way to stick in there. There were a couple of speakers that came up and had talked about how it's incumbent on members to understand their fiduciary responsibility, about how we need to come together, and I couldn't agree with that more. And I've met a lot of people over the last 3 nights, and I know a lot of you already. I don't know a single person in this room who doesn't take those things seriously or who puts the taxpayers' money at risk. So I think we can give ourselves a little bit more credit, ease up on the rhetoric a little bit, even though maybe it makes the headlines. And one question I did have was that 2 of the previous speakers had talked about a per household cost, $170, $200, and that kind of piqued my interest. And I was wondering, I've had questions from my constituents about what does it mean to me, this 1.25 million or 1.5 million. Is that a question we could answer, like an average or a bracket to each household?
Mr. Johnson, do you have that number?
It's approximately $170 per household if this $1,582,000 was acted upon. Okay. To the top 5 taxpayers, that's much higher, obviously. I'll give you an example. I believe Siemens is just about $29,000. The Walpole Mall and I'm missing out on our the Eversource would also see somewhere in the 20s, 20,000 to 30,000 worth of savings.
Okay, thank you. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, and I didn't know about those numbers, but what I'm trying to get at here is people come up here and they're saying we're not thinking about the taxpayer, we're not thinking about the people, everyone's getting brushed under the rug. And when I hear that $170 is a lot of money, it's a fair amount of money, so I don't want anyone getting up here and saying that I think $170 is nothing, because I heard that's going on Facebook, even though I'm not on Facebook, so I guess I'm missing out. But $170 is the average. That means there's people getting less. And there's people getting less. Those people, their property is worth less. They're paying less because they don't have as much. And they're getting less. And who's getting more? Corporations, commercial interests, people whose properties are worth a lot more. So I get it when people say, hey, I want the town to pay, I want it to be fair. But don't get up here and say that you're in it for the little people, because there's people here that really have needs. We have targeted tax relief. This body, and I wasn't a part of it at the time, passed that in the spring, I believe it was. And that's exactly what we need, and we need more of that for seniors who are on a fixed income and young adults. And actually, speaking of young adults and professionals and people moving in here, we need to have more affordable housing. So we heard a presentation from the Walpole Housing Partnership, of which I'm a member. And actually, a few of you are out here tonight as well. And I've met some really great people through being a part of that. And I think that that's a pretty balanced group of folks to address that problem, which is exactly what we need, is balanced folks to come together. And I've learned a lot talking to people that I wouldn't have met if I hadn't have joined that. So I think that's really important to join those sorts of things and for people to take it seriously and say, well, we need to do more for seniors on fixed incomes. That's a fact. That's a real world problem in this town. It's a serious one, and it's got to be addressed. Whether this gets voted up or down tonight has no bearing on that. Okay, it has no bearing on seniors on fixed incomes and whether they can afford housing here, whether they can afford to live here. And it has no bearing on people who can't afford to live here because rent is too high. So $170 is a lot of money, $200, whatever it may be. And sure, it could buy somebody lunch for a week, 2 weeks, a month, but we need people to buy lunch for the whole year. We need people to afford their mortgage or the housing costs for the whole year, not just for a month or a couple of weeks. So this doesn't go nearly far enough, in my opinion, and I think we need reasonable real-world solutions to reasonable real-world problems. And if we put our time and our energy into the Walpole Housing Partnership and maybe some of these other items, an actual targeted relief for people who need tax relief, we put our collective effort into that, we can make some real difference and really help those people without affecting the bottom line of the town and these other projects that we want to do.
Mr. Barrett, please wrap up.
Okay. And that's all I have, so I'll wrap up. Thank you.
Mr. Abbott.
Bill Abbott, Precinct 6. What I'd like to address is I think we're giving, at least to some folks, the impression that we have $6.3 million of free money that we are spending on optional items, nice to have things. I think if we spent more time when we discuss articles like Article 8 and 9, the capital budget articles, we'd find that most of this money is being spent replacing vehicles that need to be replaced, fixing leaky roofs, replacing outdated computers. As a member of the Capital Budget Committee I was on for 6 years, you would see that they have a rotating program, and you certainly wouldn't want, it's not like we're buying computers for the first time, we're replacing things like that. Broken sidewalks, things of that nature. It is, most of the free cash is really being spent on things that if we wanted to kill off free cash would end up being as expense items in people's budgets. So for that reason, I'm supporting no action on Article 18.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. O'Leary.
John O'Leary, Precinct 3. Much of what I wanted to say, Mr. Ardeen has already, Valancourt has already addressed, so it'll shorten my speech. The one point we have to notice is that this is listed as a one-time item. It is not something that's going to propagate up into a disaster of enormous calamities. Much as Mr. Johnson might like to say that, it isn't true. A one-time expense is going to be covered, as he addressed. It's a one-time use of free cash. We're spending free cash hand over fist this week, this town meeting. Town meeting is here to represent the town. We are just one piece of the town. The town is not the town administrator, it is not the Board of Selectmen, it is not the Finance Committee, it is not the School Committee. The town is all of its inhabitants. We have been elected to represent all of the inhabitants. Much as we think we do all the time, we still put our interpretation on every vote we take. Before we take any votes on articles like this, we should think about all of the taxpayers. While it's been pointed out that the commercial taxpayers will get back much more than the others, that's because they're paying much more. They're still getting back the same proportion that every other taxpayer will get back. And if people were our town was so interested in collecting tax money and keeping it for their own use, why did the town several years ago give away tax income of approximately $20 million when there was very little reason for it? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Mr. Damish.
Damish, Precinct 7, and just want to let everyone know, I co-petitioned this article with Ann, and our goal was not to divide the town. Our goal is just to do what's fair. We felt that what's been going on the last few years is, as Mr. Valancourt said, the free cash is being pumped up. So what happened is we became aware. A group of people became aware. I went to some senior events. I went to some, just walking around town, I hear, people ask me as RTM, why is it so high? I said, we'll figure out what's going on. So this is what's going on. They're underestimating, which is bumping up the free cash, and now they want to spend it on some items. Okay, are these items needed or not? That's what we're here to discuss. So we work back and forth with it. Instead, what's been going on in these meetings is we just spend. So, as Mr. Kelly said, we're not against fields. We just want something practical. But we want something that's fair. So that's what we felt maybe 25% give back would be fair, because what Mr. Johnson just said is if we didn't have this $1.6 million, we'd be bankrupt in 10 years. But let's say we didn't have the $1.6 million, like if it never came in, are we still going to be bankrupt in 10 years? No. So again, as co-petitioner of this article, I talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people are scared, and they're angry. They're being pushed out of town. Make no mistake, it's a battle for us to be able to afford to stay in our homes for years to come. And we're a very passionate group, us townies who've been here forever, right? And then the people who moved in, and we welcome them with open arms, but we want them to be able to stay as well. We love our town, we love our community, we want to be able to continue to live and contribute to its success for many years. We just see this as a very fair way to help out everyone in the town, making sure that they can stay here and try to help their kids live here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damish. Mr. Chekarowski.
Philip Sharofsky, Precinct 7. I just have 2 points to make. First, just want to reiterate, if we're trying to solve the problem where we have high real estate taxes, and that's a relative term, because they're not really high in the sense that we need to address our town's needs. But the real problem is that our real estate taxes are regressive. They don't take into account people's ability to pay them. And that problem's not going to be addressed by giving back a one-time or 2 times whatever money back from the free cash. So I just want to reiterate that solution falls in other places, such as the different programs that we have done and more that we need to do to give people options when they can't afford to pay the real estate taxes. But the other part of it is that if we want to sustain the town, we need to invest in infrastructure. This has worked out very well. We need to continue doing it. I don't see the things we're spending money on as not being necessary. And then I just want to bring attention to on the yellow handout where it had the list of free cash over the years. That one thing it doesn't show is the percentage. So even though the dollar amount for the free cash from 2012 to 2018 is double or whatever, more than the 2004 to 2011, but as a percentage of the town's revenue, I didn't look it up the actual amount, but obviously our revenue has gone up a lot too. So the percentage-wise, it probably isn't that much different. So I'm standing in favor of voting for the no action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chekarowski. Mr. Blau?
David Blau, Precinct 6. Through you, Mr. Moderator, I have a question for the town administrator, and hopefully it's going to be a softball for you, sir. I just wanted to ask you a quick question about this sheet that came along in the packet, in the booklet. You wrote that you said you understand there's a desire by some to reduce the tax rate here in Walpole, and I certainly do appreciate that, sir. I think that is a valid concern that a lot of people here have. And you said that there are other more sustainable ways to do that rather than using free cash. I look forward to discussing the matter further as we get closer to town meeting. And here we are at town meeting, so Mr. Moderator, I'd appreciate if the town administrator would elaborate further on some of those alternate methods that he had alluded to.
Mr. Johnson?
Sure. The one that comes to mind off the top of my head is the levy limit. My general concern, which I've said it tonight, is using free cash, which is a one-time source of revenue, We've talked about it, it's been an up and down roller coaster over the last 16 or so years. We never know what it's going to be. The way to approach it, and I've explained this to the lead petitioner too, is to approach it through the levy limit. Each year I set my budget on the amount allowed by the law. Within the law, they allow us to go up 2.5% each year. We're not breaking the law, we stay within the law. I work with the Board of Selectmen, ask for my directives. I then present it to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee decides that it's ultimately their budget. After I hand it off to them, I advise them with our Finance Director and our Town Accountant. But after that, it's their budget and it's their recommendation that this body considers. Over the last couple of weeks, people have questioned specifically the estimates that I'm conservative in my estimates. Paul Stas has agreed with me, Dan Bruce has agreed with it, John Valancourt agreed with it when he was the chairman of the Finance Committee. People were comfortable with those numbers because, again, when we had the recession in 2008 and 2010, that time range, our receipts, our local receipts dipped drastically. We saw a dip there. So I am anticipating that eventually this economy is going to make a downturn. And I don't want to be too far in because we'll have to make that up in some way as far as cuts or dipping into the stabilization. So just circle back to your question, what's the other way that comes to the top of my mind? Not raise the levy limit to the 2.5%.
All right, and then I would urge the town administrator and the finance committee to take that into consideration as a viable option in the next cycle, so that we may actually see a reduced tax burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blau. Mr. Sullivan.
Mark Sullivan, Precinct 3, member of the FinCom. I've had the opportunity to listen to the various speakers and just wanted to kind of put my thoughts together, and I'm in favor of no action. And taking thoughts from Mr. Pila, Salvatore, and Valancourt, as Mr. Pila mentioned, we all have a fiduciary responsibility for the taxpayers. Watch out for the taxpayers and invest in the town. And whether I approve the fields or don't approve the fields, I feel I'm doing that, as you do with your votes. And I was struck by Selectman Salvatore's comments about, what do you do with free cash? You have three choices. Yes, you can give the money back, pay down debt. For me personally, the big issue and concern I have is the OPEB. We have a $30 million obligation for the health care of town employees, which currently is unfunded. And this is when I was struck with Mr. Valancourt's comment. So my concern is this with the OPEB. You can pay me now under your terms, or you're going to pay me later under my terms. And he mentioned about the squeeze. So right now, we're able to handle as a town this OPEB cost that comes up each year. But as we leave it unfunded and don't have additional interest resources with a balance, that squeeze is going to get tighter and tighter. So 5, 10, 20 years from now, the RTMs are going to be saying, gee, our budget is X, but the first 20% of it has to go to cover these unfunded OPEB costs. And so that's my concern. So I'm just cautioning as we look at this item, because it comes up every year whether cash should go back, and I would really be opposed to cash ever going back, unfortunately, until that OPEB debt is somehow, we have a long-term plan in place, or something that says, we're comfortable where we know we're going to be able to meet our obligations without burdening. Because when you think about it, you take some money back now as taxpayers, all you're doing is shifting to future taxpayers. So again, take the money back now, but hang on to it, because you're going to be giving it back to the town in 10, 20 years at a much higher rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Ms. Brown?
Susan Brown, Precinct 4. Through you, Mr. Moderator, I'd like to ask a question of the administrator or whoever is the appropriate person. The petition, as expressed in Article 18 in the warrant, talks about giving back this money by reducing the tax rate for fiscal year 2019. My question is that in fact quite different from an expense?
Mr. Johnson?
I'm sorry, Could you, are you looking for a check back, or is that what you're?
No, the language of the article is but to give back the money by reducing the tax rate. And Mr. Valancourt says that it's no different than an actual free cash expense. And I want to ask you if that's the truth, or if this is what makes it the compounding take effect.
It's actually reducing the levy limit. That's why when Mr. Blau asked me, that's the way, when we go in and plan all this, we set the levy limit. We are reducing the amount raised through taxation for this year. So for example, and it was on one of my charts there, let's say this year, if this follows through, it'll dip down to just about a 1.5% raise in the property taxes. Next year, the projections that we put together is about a 5 or 5.4% raise in property taxes for fiscal 20 when we're setting the tax rate. So we have to make that money up. What we're never able to go back and get that free cash. It's gone. That 1.5 is gone. But some way the next year we have to make it up. We have to either make it up through reducing the levy limit, or by finding more free cash to keep it level, because it continues each year.
So there is a compounding effect, and Mrs. Gallivan is absolutely right to be concerned about that. Am I correct?
There most certainly is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Ms. Tomaso.
I just have two things. I think it was Mr. Sullivan who spoke before Susan. I agree 100% with you. I think you were right on in what you were saying. The second thing I have is to Mr. Moderator, move the question.
Sorry, you cannot move the question and precede comments. So you're out of order, Mr. Masso. Ms. Lawson.
Lawson, Precinct 2, a member of Finance Committee. I move the question.
Second.
Mr. Breen, was that you?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Breen. The question has been moved. It requires a simple, a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of moving the question, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
It is a 2/3 vote. We will now, just for clarification, because I want to make sure folks understand, if you vote yes, it is for no action and we'll be done with this matter this evening. If you vote no, then we will have a substitute motion on free cash, as I understand it. Thank you. Mr. Taylor, we haven't even taken a vote yet. Please sit down.
Mr. Moderator, could you just repeat what you just said?
Yes, I
Thank
will.
you.
That's what I was trying to do, Ms. Augusta, to make this clear. So if you vote yes, you are voting for no action, and we'll be done with this matter. If you vote no, you are voting against no action, which means that there'll be no motion on the floor, and it's my understanding we'll have a substitute motion forthcoming. Okay? Just to be clear. All right? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No. I challenge a vote for roll call vote.
Mr. Taylor, let me finish. Then you can challenge, okay? I'm going to say that was a favorable vote. So the motion, the no action carries. Now, Mr. Taylor, you may rise.
Challenging it.
Okay, we will. I need members to stand to have a standing count in support of Mr. Taylor's standing count. Okay, that is sufficient. Thank you.
By
Tellers,
name.
please rise.
Roll call vote by name.
Mr. Moderator,
Roll call vote by name. Moderate, Mr. Moderator.
Excuse me 1 second, Mr. Taylor. Okay, so folks, as I thought, if you want a roll call, it needs to be prior to the vote. So now what we have to do is we have to have the standing count before you can challenge and go for a roll call vote. That's in the policy, that's in the rules. If anybody wants to look it up and double check me, you may, but that's the order. So we need to go to a standing count first, and then Mr. Taylor, if you still wish to basically challenge the standing count with a roll call, you may, okay?
I want by name, though.
Please be seated, Mr. Taylor, for the time being. All right. Mr. Buckley, do you have a point of order?
Mr. Sullivan spoke to the article, so if the other Mr. Buckley could be the second teller.
Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator.
Yes, Mr. Costa.
I believe Mr. Taylor requested a roll call vote before the vote was announced.
I did not catch that.
You responded and advised him that he could not call for the roll call vote before the vote was called.
Okay, so no, you know what? So Mr. Taylor just jumped up and I hadn't even basically determined what was going on. So if that was the case, let's just go straight to a roll call vote. Okay, and let's get this done. Does that sound good, folks? All right, thank you. Mr. Taylor, I apologize for the confusion. You just jumped up and I was trying to get going. So thank you. Ms. Regusta, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, folks, just so you know, we're going to go a little quicker tonight than we did in the last roll call, so pay attention. We've talked about this. We're going to move it right along, okay? So when your name's called, respond. We are voting. No action is a yes vote, and that means we're done with the matter if it carries. You're confirming the Finance Committee main motion. If you vote no, then we will have no motion on the floor, and we will more than likely have a substitute motion from Ms. Regusta. Okay?
Okay, so we'll do this by precinct, and I'll name the precinct before I call you. Megan Ahigian is a yes. Danielle Akins. Elizabeth Barrows. Catherine Conti.
Did you hear she abstained?
No, I did not. Elizabeth Barrows abstain? Okay. Sorry about that. Catherine Conti. John Curley. Nancy Dayan. Jennifer Giotzis. Darren Hassenjager. John Hassenjager. Tim Hempton. George Hodges. Linda Keefe. John Leith. Glenn Mafee. Scott Mafee. Jennifer McAndrew. Jillian Morley. Christine Walzer. Precinct 2. Ron Ardeen. Andrew Basevich. Lisa Marie Bastianelli. Mark Breen. Thomas Coyne III. Kistra Damaso. Barbara Gallivan. Allison Hamilton. Mary Ellen Jordan Mercier. Valerie Corey. Alice Susan Lawson. John Lombardi. Sean McCauley. David McCallum. Clifton Snuffer Jr. Judith Stanton. Chandler Sullivan. Ann Walsh. Laura Whalen Bratzis. Precinct 3. Catherine Abadi. Jane Bergen. Edward Damish. Laura DeLay. Janet Fasanello. Patrick Fasanello. Ken Fettig. Lori Golub. Patrick Hinton. Susan Masterson. Susan Masterson? No. Michael McGrath. Betsy Mullen. John O'Leary. Robert O'Leary. Ann Ragosta. Martha Ryan. Maureen Smith. Mark Sullivan. Richard Zaccaro. Precinct 4. Richard Brown. Susan Brown. Josette Burke. William Carroll. Paul Connolly. Virginia Connolly. Carrie Denizio. Joseph Deneen. Andrew Flowers. Justin Hayner. Stephen Hendricks. Edward Lynch III. Shannon McCarthy. Fiona Murphy. Susan Naughton. John Robinson Jr. David L. Salvatore. Jill Tackett. Mark Trudeau. Precinct 5. Harry Cloud Jr. Roland Cuniff. Craig Dalton. Peter Drogan. Jeffrey Fisher Sr. Don Freiberger. Kathleen Garvin. Bernard Goba. Yes. William Hamilton. Maura Harding Clow. Edward Jakowski. Joanne Mulligan. John Murtaugh. Bruce Norwell IV. James Pellegrin. Eric Samargidelis. Paul Stashikevicius. Michael Thiele. John Valancourt. Precinct 6. William Abbott. Alan Albert. David Blau. Thomas Bowen Jr. Thomas Brown. B.J. Burke. Donna Donnellan. Robert Donnellan. Audrey Grace. Jennifer Healy. Jean Hogan. John Lee. Wayne Leston. Sean McDonald. Sally Rose. John Shepard. Donna Sherman. Kristen Sirek. James Taylor. Precinct 7. Benjamin Barrett. Gerald Blair. Robert Buckley. William Buckley Jr. David Clark. Diane Culhane. Nicholas Culhane. Philip Chekhorovsky. Robert Damisch. Ed Fordsberg. Louis Hagler. Paul Hagler. Joseph Kelly. Michelle Marcados. Richard Notabart. Richard Pila. Lucy Romanowitz. Douglas Shea. Albert Tedesco. Precinct 8. Harry Mercedes. Brian Connor. Paul English. Nancy Gallivan. Richard Giusti. Kathleen Grulich. Sarah Khatib. Mary LaRosa. Christy Majeski. Susan Maynard. Joseph Moraski. Beth Muccini. James O'Neill. Janet Rock. Victor Senna. Susan Shockett. Susan Spendley. Lisa Vanderlinden. Thank you.
Folks, the roll call vote was 76 yes, 44 noes, so the yes have it. There's no action on Article 18. Article 19. This is a citizen's petition by Catherine Carroll. It is a request to allow swimming at Jarvis Farm. It is regularly moved and seconded that this matter be referred back to the petitioner. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee.
Finance Committee voted 13-0-0, refer back to committee.
Mr. Gallivan, Board of Selectmen.
Selectmen voted 5-0-0, refer back to petitioner.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Mr. Carroll.
Your first name on the form, you don't put your wife's name down, you put William Carroll down. So this isn't Catherine, it's William Carroll's article. Second, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I went to the Water and Power, I've been working on this for almost I thought about this 6 years ago, and I just started working on it. And basically, I want swimming on the weekends at Jarvis Pond. So I went in front of the Sewer and Water Commission, and I got a vote with Jim's help in the rec department and downtown that they were going to let us swim on the weekends in the summertime for a trial period of two weekends. And then the last minute, one of the members said, no, I just want 1 day. I just don't think we can do it in 1 day. I wanted 4 weeks in the summer for a trial period. Jim, can you talk anything about this, or are you allowed to?
This is under the provisions of the Sewer and Water Commissioners.
Okay. So basically, I'm going back to the sewer and water, and I'm going to petition for at least, hopefully, for 2 weekends that we could try to have swimming down at Jarvis Pond. I had a PowerPoint presentation, but it got lost somewhere. So I sent everybody in the group my PowerPoint. If you need it afterwards to explain. You people who are new, we paid $4.5 million for that facility. And the facts are, there's a camp there, and it's run for the whole summer, and it's for the kids. And out of the 30 days that it was open, eight of them was closed because of bacteria. Another fact is that, just one more fact and I'll let you go. You paid $4.5 million for it. So basically, I'm not going to give up the ship. I'm going to go back to the water and sewer and ask for more time. One day just does not do a trial. I mean, come on, let's be reasonable about it. You know, basically what's going to go on is Jim backed me with the rec department, and you're going to have lifeguards there and a security guard there. Because I was a lifeguard up in Cape Cod, and I always had backup, because you don't know what's going to happen. So I just, basically you're going to see me come to the next meeting, and hopefully then I'll have my 2 days, or I really want 4 weekends in a row in August, but if it's 2 weekends in August, hopefully you'll back me on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 19? There being none, this is a motion to, oh, sorry. Mr. Pila.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, is there someone from the Water and Sewer Commission? What is the objection to having children swim in Jarvis Pond?
Mr. Abbott.
Thank you, Bill Abbott, Chairman of the Sewer and Water Commission. The concern that the Sewer and Water Commission had when it was initially brought to us was one of liability. Mr. Carroll has been very persistent, so we said, all right, let's do it on a trial basis. And Jim got some figures, and we attempted a motion for a 2-week trial. That failed, and as Mr. Carroll mentioned, another member said 1 week or 1 day, and so we had something. We said, okay, we'll give that. This would be a rec department program. The water and sewer folks don't hire lifeguards or have any skills in that area. Basically, what our vote did was, well, actually, I should say, anyone who wants to use anything at Jarvis Farm starts by going to the rec department. The rec department comes to the sewer and water and asks, is it okay? The effect of our vote was saying, if the rec department said we wanted to do a trial, we would say yes, and it's for 1 day. I understand Mr. Carroll's concerns that 1 day really isn't enough, and certainly maybe if he does come back to us and presents his either 2 or 4 weeks, we could consider that again. But there's no, obviously we do allow swimming with the summer camp. There was some concern when you're talking about something other than preteens being shepherded around by camp counselors. So I welcome Mr. Carroll coming back to our body and trying again.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. Taylor?
Is this a petition, am I right?
This is a citizen's petition, that's correct.
Well, how come you didn't come a couple months ago with, to the Board of Selectmen so everybody can have it in our packages? This is a petition, and you go from there. So I'm against this, and that about swimming up there and all this stuff there, because there's a liability insurance and all this stuff there. If somebody got hurt up there, drowned, this and that, it should be in our packages, not a petition.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any further questions or comments? If not, this is a vote to refer back to the petitioner. It requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 20. This is a citizen's petition for a request for notification to abutters. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town take no action on Article 20. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote?
Finance Committee voted 11-0-1, no action.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Gallivan, Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen voted no action, 3-1-1.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Any questions or comments with respect to Article 20? Mr. Carroll? By the way, this is Mr. Carroll's petition. I failed to mention that.
This was a petition that I researched a little bit. There was a, in my district, somebody came forward and basically they built a bunch of condos, houses on Stone Street. And what happened was they went, this is why it's sad, but you can't trust your neighbors. They went to a wine and cheese type thing with the people, and basically they said there's going to be 3 small houses. And then the Walsh brothers got involved, and guess what? They put a huge house where the 3 houses are. Now, the reason why I wanted my petition was I wanted the people to know that the developer changed the plans from the original plans. That was my petition. It got voted down because everybody here knows, I didn't know this, you only get 1 chance and 1 chance only. And then after that, you come to the meetings or that's it, we're done. And, you know, basically I did it for the 2 teachers in Walpole, and basically the developer took advantage of it. He saw no one come to the meeting, and he said, okay, I can build a bigger place and get more money. It's sad. Mr. Morosky, is that right? Tried to change the law that, because I did a little research, the footage is 15,000 square feet? Do I have somebody's? Well, I have paperwork on it. Basically, if they have an oversized lot, they can come and build 3 houses next to you. There's some kind of, I went upstairs to the zoning department, and I find out it's true. There's some kind of loophole that they can do 3 places on an oversized lot. Now, I would recommend that everybody go down and see what I'm talking about on Stone Street. You can't miss it. And just think to yourself, this could be done to me if somebody had an oversized lot. What is the solution to it? I do not know. I just want to bring it up to the people that there must be a solution to it, and the town has to take some kind of action towards it. That's it. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. So this is a vote for no action on Article 20. It requires a...
Sorry, I'll be really, really quick.
You don't... I'm fine with that, Ms. McCarthy.
Okay. Shannon McCarthy, Precinct 4. I live on Stone Street. I went to that wine and cheese meeting. I can confirm that we were presented with one plan and not informed when something entirely different was done. So, Mr. Carroll, I support you in your efforts, and I'd be happy to work with you to find a good solution. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. McCarthy. Mr. O'Leary.
Robert O'Leary, Precinct 3. I also am in support of Mr. Carroll. Quite often when you go to these meetings, there are changes, mostly in planning, less so in zoning because it tends not to go on as long. but some of the changes are major changes, and I think the neighborhood should know about that, but who's going to pay for it? If we could decide on who would end up having to pay for these changes, that would be one question, but I am in support of this, not only for zoning articles, but for planning board meetings as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary.
My suggestion is that, you know, not to have this happen again, but a solution that the town, we put so much money in all these other things, put it in the computer systems. Basically, you have all the information in front of you when I went to the building department, but we don't publish that. People just don't have time anymore with families and everything to go to every meeting for it. And I say, we're in a computer age. Somebody should just be able to bring it up on a computer screen and say, yeah, they made a change. I'm going down there and find them. We put so much money into schools and fields, but I was a programmer for 40 years, a senior program analyst. And we have to put some money into our computer systems. First of all, Jim knows this already. I rammed him about the web page. I hate it. I think it's stupid. You know, I mean, he knows that already.
Mr. Carroll, stay on point, please.
Oh, on point? Okay, on point. We should have everything up online instead of trying to look at meetings on camera. Do you understand me that? Can you get that? That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Mr. Moraski?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Moraski, Precinct 8 and member of the Planning Board. The resolution was passed, or the article was passed at town meeting to give the Planning Board site plan review. We did not have that authority for the project that was mentioned on Stone Street, but town meeting restored that authority, I believe, either in the spring or of 2018, or it could have been the fall of 2017. It was one of those articles where we discussed 6C 4A for about the 50th time. So you'll probably never see the planning board reinstate that article again. If someone else wants to work on it, be my guest, because that just brings a lot of controversy. It is in an area that needs to be addressed, but town meeting did give us site plan review. Whether or not site plan review resolves the problem, I don't know. We'll have to see, because we have not had an instance of that happening again. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this is a vote for no action and requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The ayes have it. It is a vote. Mr. Snuffer, second by Mr. Sorry, Mr. Hinton, I just had a brain cramp there. Second by Mr. Hinton. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? We'll see you in the spring.